the package of measures associated. But can I just clarify in relation to the bill, what's the timing under which you're expected to finalise the bill for it to be introduced into Parliament? Is your current work plan anticipate that this committee will finish its work first, or are you working to a deadline based on the Your Say consultation of coming back with a final bill to be introduced into the Parliament prior to the conclusion of this committee?
I don't think that's really been determined yet, other than the Premier's obviously stated that he'd like to put the legislation before the end of the year.
So what timeline are you working to have the legislation finalised, taking on board input from the Your Say and indeed the implications of the federal accord?
Yeah. So our aim is to, as we said, the consultation from our end finishes on the 18th of August. So we're working towards a middle of September deadline, ideally, to be able to incorporate all of that feedback and look at what will be proposed to Parliament.
So, I guess this is a matter for the committee, but can I just put on notice that after that final bill comes out, I'd be interested in inviting you or the Chief Executive and yourselves to come back and talk about that, because it's that bill which this committee will have to ultimately also give consideration prior to coming up with our final plan. So can I ask that once you've got a date for that final bill, if that can be, for the finalisation of that bill, if that can be provided to the committee, that might enable us to ensure that we have at least one day of hearing after that date to ask any questions about it.
We'll see how we go. May or may not be possible.
My other questions are about policy, so if anyone else wanted to talk about the bill more, then
we stay with you, Member for Moralta.
All right, thank you. What role did the department play in developing the package of measures associated with the proposal, the $440 million of investments?
So the department didn't have a role in that process. That was led by the Treasurer in consultation with the universities.
But I know I've spoken in estimates and asked questions that the Deputy Premier has said on a number of occasions that this unit that's been created in the Department for Industry, Innovation and Skills is the government's policy generator, the bringing together of resources from the previous DIS and Department for Education to consider higher education reform. Is that correct? So has the government sought the advice of the department in relation to the package of measures as to, in terms of policy advice?
No, as I said, those discussions were between the Treasurer and the universities. The unit that Karen set up was obviously there to establish the University Merger Commission. If that was to proceed, that was deferred, and our attention then turned to the development of the legislation draft.
Has there been any policy consideration within state government as to the package of measures in terms of whether they have been recommended by anyone or considered by anyone in the public service?
Those discussions would be presumably with the Department of Treasury and Finance in terms of public service.
I'll look forward to, I think we're hearing from them at a later date, so I'll look forward to that. Was this department responsible for the development of, without going into the detail of Cabinet submission, was this department responsible for the development of that Cabinet decision, or was that also Treasury and Finance?
You're referring to the Cabinet submission around financial package of support? Well,
presumably the announcement of the proposal went through Cabinet, so I would imagine that includes a range of measures, including financial support, including the legislation that we've been talking about and associated matters.
Well, the answer here may well trespass on the Cabinet process, but I'm going to allow the question.
Yeah, so the Cabinet submission process around the financial package wasn't led by our department, that was Treasury and Finance.
And then there was a separate process around the legislation and what would be undertaken through this consultation process.
If I could just quickly ask a question.
Member for Florey.
Is it correct that your office have input into the financial package?
No.
No.
No. So that was those discussions were held with Treasury and Finance.
Member for Marianta.
Has your office or your department been asked by anyone in government at any point for policy advice on either the package or the broader question of a merger?
Once again, there is the risk, of course, that the cabinet process is compromised, but our witnesses are very sophisticated participants in this process. I'm going to allow the question.
So as we've said, we weren't involved in the discussions around the financial package, but as far as broader policy advice, part of this policy unit's remit is to work with the universities to work in the best interest of the state. So we've certainly been providing advice around how we can work best with the universities in a broader context within the higher education sector in South Australia.
Thank you. My understanding is your office was established on the 1st of July last year as a result of machinery of government changes. Can I, for the benefit of the committee, can you detail who's in your office, how many staff, what role they are?
Sure. So as you say, it was established on the 1st of July. There was one staff member at that point, a principal policy officer. I started in the role on the 5th of December, so there was a little bit of a lag. So prior to that, the remit of this policy unit was managed by other staff within the department, and then the dedicated director role, myself, started in December. So for most of this year, it has been the two of us, and we've recently appointed another principal policy officer who has started 4 weeks ago.
And has anyone in either your office, or the department, or government more broadly, that to your awareness, undertaken any policy work to consider the risks of the proposal in addition to its benefits, and what mitigation measures have been put in place to meet those potential risks of the proposal?
Not at this point in time, no.
Tammy, did you?
Honourable Ms Franks.
Yeah, I just wanted to go to some of the detail in the draft bill and get some clarity about the Adelaide University Student Support Fund. And I know that you've said that some of this advice has come from the Department of Treasury and Finance, but it's here in the draft bill, so I'm hoping you can answer questions about how it will operate. Is that fair?
Oh, sure, about how the Student Support Fund will operate.
Yeah.
So the details of how both of those funds will operate will be determined through the agreed guidelines that will be agreed between the Treasurer and the Council, and then there'll also be an advisory committee with representatives both appointed by the Treasurer and from the universities. So that level of detail will be determined through those agreed guidelines.
Okay, but quite specifically looking here at 36 on the Act, page 2021, largely on page 21 of the draft bill, the fund consists of an amount of $100 million to be paid into the fund on the commencement of this section, and money paid into the fund at the direction or with the approval of the Treasurer, and income and accretions, I'm not familiar with that word, from investment of money from the fund, and other money required to be paid into the fund under any other act. Does that mean that that $100 million sits there and the interest is paid?
Exactly.
It's the returns on the fund.
So the $100 million isn't what we're spending up front, is it?
No, that's a good point. So the
It's
universities
the half all over again.
So yeah, the universities aren't being given $100 million.
Right.
The universities are being given the return on.
So there's $100 million, but it's going into a fund, and only if we make money out of that $100 million does it actually go to students who might be in need of support, because we've been told $100 million is going to support students who can't currently engage in university education to the fullest because they're from a low SES background or have disability or other particular barriers. So how much money are we expecting to see in the first 4 years of this fund?
I think that's hard to
Nothing near
anticipate-
100 million, one would imagine, unless you're
depending on the return.
putting it on a bet and getting double your money back, which I can't imagine is going to happen. So we're looking at what?
Well, it'll be Funds SA who will be managing the fund, and I'm sure they'll have a mandate to invest in a way that will maximise returns from the fund.
Huh. So if the stock market makes a loss that year, as we've seen, I think 5 times in the last 20 years, what happens? Does that mean there's no money for students to access the university the following year through this fund?
Detailed questions that would be that will emerge in the development of the guidelines.
What provisions have been made to ensure that there is actually money going to students to access the University of Adelaide, or Adelaide University as it will be, each and every year if the stock market fails the previous year?
Okay, and I think they're really questions for Treasury and Finance.
Okay.
Can I ask a supplementary on that? There is a
Ms. Benoit.
provision in the bill which asks about other money that's required to be paid into the fund under any other act. What funds would they be?
I think that's leaving the door open for if there were, for the
Additional
longevity
funds.
of this act, if there were other, then it speaks to that.
So it's not necessarily limited just to the interest earned on the $100 million fund. There is the ability in the bill to have further funds injected, depending on what's, I guess, in the guidelines.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So operate like an endowment.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the question on the fund, has there been any consideration given or any feedback you've received about the possibility of expanding the fund to include students from Flinders University as well?
We haven't received any feedback on that question.
No one's raised that with you?
No, not specifically, no.
Is it something that could be contemplated as part of the examination of the draft bill?
It could be. I suppose being an act that establishes one particular university, this may not be the best mechanism for that to happen there, but there may be other mechanisms, and those conversations will no doubt. We haven't been involved in those conversations, but they may be.
Thank you.
And for Adelaide. My apologies.
Just in a general sense around what are the benefits at a larger scale for research institutions when applying for funding, and what are maybe then on the flip side the challenges of when you are a smaller institution going for those research dollars?
Well, I think scale does matter when it comes to research. I think you can get the benefit from increased research intensity. I think a larger university benefits from the ability to undertake transdisciplinary research. You have the ability to attract, highly talented researchers that have the ability to attract competitive Commonwealth and industry funding. So I think the opportunity that presents with the new university is the opportunity to increase research income and become globally recognised in terms of research intensity.
And I think I'd just add to that, that then affects your ability to attract really high achieving research staff, that, it's a chicken and egg. They're attracted to more research intensive universities. That then brings in more research income and builds international collaborations.
Member for Moralta.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity the member for Adelaide's provided to have that advice. I asked earlier about advice being sought by anyone in relation to the policy merits of the proposal. Are there any instances where your unit or your department has provided in writing advice to a minister of the merits, or is that actually the first time you've been asked?
On the merits of the merger?
Yeah.
Not specifically in terms of, as it relates to research income, but we have lots of conversations, with the Deputy Premier, and we often talk about the importance of scale.
Well, and that's quite helpful. So the merits of scale for research, and we've also talked about student engagement, particularly low SES students, as the I think twin pillars of the benefits that have been described on many occasions by the government. And I'm open-minded about that. I am interested in the risks that have been presented as well. So from a policy point of view, do you have a view on what risks may also sit alongside those potential benefits, and what mitigation measures need to be in place to guard us against those risks?
We haven't done a detailed risk assessment, risk analysis at this point in time. And I assume, the feasibility study business case undertaken by the universities looked at all of the risks as well as benefits.
Has that information that you've just described being done by the universities been provided to your department in any format?
No.
Oh, Ms. Norris.
I was just going to ask another follow-up question in relation to those funds. So just to be clear, the provisions around the fund, there would be advice, more specific advice that we could get on that from Treasury, because I'm assuming that is in their brief. Yes. And there would have been, to your knowledge, input from, there would have been some sort of assessment done by Treasury together with the universities in terms of what those figures look like. And so it's on the basis of those considerations that these provisions have been drafted the way they are.
Yes, that's correct.
So those questions around the monetary figures and so forth, and any other funds that could or could not come into that, should be directed at Treasury.
Absolutely.
For clarity around what. Okay,
correct.
Thank you.
Member Gibson.
Thank you. Are you able to speak to what the opportunities might be for international student experience?
Yeah, definitely. I think this presents quite an exciting opportunity for international students. Two of the key priorities that have been reflected in the Adelaide University's vision is around that increase in sustainable quality offering, and also an industry engaged student curriculum. And we know that those are two big decision-making points for international students. And so the opportunity to attend a university that is part of the Group of 8 and is a research-intensive, prestigious top 100 university is certainly appealing for for international students. But probably just as important is that commitment to industry engagement, to the entrepreneurial opportunities that students will have, and to that increased work integrated learning. We hear time and again that that's one of the biggest challenges that international students face, is that opportunity to get experience in the workforce, and that then increases their likelihood of being able to gain employment post-study, which is a key priority for us given our workforce shortages. So this, I think, is a really good opportunity for us to be able to promote a new offering for international students that really has that focus on those skills that they need to succeed.
Further questions from members?
Earlier, I think you said that any consideration of the risks or mitigation of the risks would have been contemplated in the business cases done by the universities. But I think you also said that you hadn't seen those business cases. Can I ask whether the department or anyone in government has asked for copies of those business cases so that they can be considered?
We haven't asked for those business cases. And I can't comment from other agencies.
And in relation to then, we've had questions about the benefits of the merger for research, the benefits on international student experience. Are there any areas other than those two which you've been good enough to provide our committee with advice on? Are there any measures where the department has offered policy advice to either a minister or any other unit within government?
No, not specifically. As stated earlier, we have regular conversations about higher education policy, but not specifically.
I think I've got one more on this run, and I may be done after that. But earlier, I think it was your evidence that Treasury and Finance were responsible, the responsible department within government for considering the package of measures, the $440 million package of measures, and that they were responsible for developing the submission that was considered by government. Has there been any formal or informal consultation from Treasury and Finance with your unit or your department in the development of that package of measures?
I think the department may well have had some conversations with our chief executive, but neither Karen or I were in those meetings.
Thank you.
Can't answer that question.
Yeah, so thank you for your submissions today. It sounds like there's some real benefits to the research programs and international students. Are you able to provide any advice about outside of the universities but to the state's economy, whether there'll be any benefits flowing through to people outside of the universities through this merger?
Well, I think, the opportunity that presents with world-class research being translated into commercial products and services or public good outcomes will generate a contribution to the state's GSP, provides the opportunity for new companies to emerge as spin-outs of the university that creates employment. There's opportunity to attract international investment into South Australia through research contracts with a major university that's doing research at scale.
I think there's also that focus on underrepresented groups. So that is, I think that is where real growth can be seen and should be seen, and that provides a great deal of opportunity for the state to build its workforce and to build the capacity within the state.
Member for Adelaide.
Yes, supplementary to that, asked the previous witness that given that around 5.8% of our workforce around innovation and science is based in SA and that there is a shortfall, do you see the establishment of Adelaide University addressing that shortfall and having innovation and science workforce based in South Australia?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to our earlier points about being able to attract, that's not just attracting international talent, it's also retaining local talent here as well.
Chair, thank you. I might just ask a supplementary off the back of a question asked earlier around the business case. Is it fair to say that that wasn't necessarily in your remit to request or to have oversight of some of those documents, any key documents that have been disclosed, given that there are overlapping roles and responsibilities between departments who are dealing with those issues more than you are?
Yes, I think it is fair to say that.
Further questions? I have some of my own. Has the unit or the department formed a view about the ideal size of the proposed Adelaide University by way of enrolment, and if there is any other appropriate measure for research intensity?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question, Chair?
Has the department or the unit formed a view about the ideal size of Adelaide University, either by way of enrolment or some other measure for research intensity?
No, we haven't. All I would say is that it's really clear in the interim report for the Accord that nationally we need to grow the higher education sector, and so I think both Flinders University and Adelaide University, we would be encouraging them to do that to improve the attainment rates especially across South Australia and in some of those areas of underrepresentation.
Has the department or the unit formed any views about other universities in Australia as compared to the performance of the University of Adelaide and the University of South Australia?
Performance in terms of rankings or sort of
in any
research
way?
income?
Enrolment success, research intensity, grant block or enhanced enrolment funding?
Well, sort of all of the above. I mean, we look obviously at the the benchmark of our universities to other Australian universities. We're also looking at the merged university and where that might sit in terms of research income relative to other G of 8 universities in particular.
Are you able to inform the committee about any views that the department or the unit has formed about the competitiveness of the proposed Adelaide University as against the other group of 8 universities?
We haven't done any formal analysis, but just on day one with the combined research income of the 2 universities, then that makes it comparable with, with some of the, with ANU certainly in the group of 8.
Have you formed a view about where it might rank in those 8 universities in any measure?
No, we haven't done any formal analysis on that.
Have you received or seen any analysis performed by others that might relate to that question?
No, but I think Peter Hoy, has publicly stated he expects the university will be in the top 100, sustained in the top 100 as a result of the merger.
Having regard to your experience and professional judgment, do you think that the proposed Adelaide University will be more or less competitive than the University of Adelaide and University of South Australia as they're currently formulated, under state legislation?
My opinion is I think it will be more competitive as a result of the benefits of scale.
Ms. Hunt?
Yeah, and I agree. I think if the vision is aspirational and potentially inspirational, if they achieve what they're setting out to achieve, then I think it will absolutely not only be more competitive, but actually bring more value to the state.
In regard to your experience and your professional judgment, is it in the public interest to create Adelaide University?
Personally, I believe so, yes.
Ms. Hunt?
Likewise, for the reasons I've just outlined.
Member for Moralton?
I'm just interested in the question before the last one, in when you're talking about more competitive for the benefit of the committee and the public. What do we mean when we talk about being competitive, particularly in relation to what the purposes of a university are?
There are a number of measures of success of a university, and I think we would be wanting to have a rounded view of that. So obviously rankings are one of them, but the Student Experience Survey and the International Student Barometer are 2 really critical factors, as are the Graduate Outcomes Survey. So I think a competitive university would be achieving very strong scores in each of those measures. It would have an exceptional student experience, and it would have far greater reach and be much more accessible, and have very strong graduate outcomes.
And on that basis, sometimes my understanding is certainly that some universities perform very well on some of those measures and more poorly on others. Not unusual for a university to be seen as higher ranking but have a lower satisfaction from vocational outcomes or student experience. What I guess would be the equivalent, what would be the universities in Australia that you would see as leading in that rounded perspective that you've just talked about?
Yeah, I would, off the top of my head, University of Newcastle is probably the one that first springs to mind. They have, there's a concept here of that equity and excellence are not and should not be mutually exclusive. And I think that's something that the University of Newcastle has gone, a really good way to demonstrating can be the case.
Where are the universities, all 3 in our public system here? Where are they currently on the Student Experience Survey ladders?
I don't have that data in front of me. I do know that that through COVID, the 3 universities actually continued to perform quite well, and were some of the best in the country around maintaining a positive student experience. And I know that those results have continued to be strong post-COVID, but I don't have the specific data for you. But we can certainly get that.
That would be good, thank you.
Further questions from members? Thank you, witnesses, for your attendance here today. It is appreciated. I understand a transcript will be provided in due course.